Hey folks, welcome to week 5 of DMD 200 Exploring Digital Storytelling. How is everybody? Hope you're out there being creative, doing some things you love, and staying safe. All right, so we are in week 5. So let's take a look at module 5 and see what we are up to this week. So according to the week 5 overview, this week we do have some free swim time to work on your projects and things that you're working on. You are now into the second week of your first project, but we'll talk about that in a second. Today we are going to review this concept called functional criticism, because once we finish our major storytelling projects and we turn them into Canvas, we are each going to have the opportunity to sort of critique each other and give some feedback on each other's work and help each other out. And so we're going to go over sort of a process called functional criticism that I use in a variety of my classes, and it's going to function a little bit differently because we'll be doing this strictly through Canvas as opposed to in person, but it's still the same premise. So we'll go over that in a second. That's this handout right here. You do have some reading this week. That handout, New Digital Storytelling, Chapter 2. If you recall, of course, it's this here, this handout. You've already read Chapter 1 from this handout, so you're going to read Chapter 2 this week as part of your reading material. Now, things are due this week. Your very first micro story that you've been working on is due this week, and a draft of your first project is due this week. Let's take a look at the due dates on that. The micro story one has a firm due date, so we'll take a look at that. So micro story 1 is due right here, September 25th at 10 p.m. So make sure that you have that in according to the deadline, all right? So make sure you get that in as is. Now, as far as the draft of your first project, you chose one of these 4 project types to work on first. Now, anytime this week you want, there's no firm due date on it, anytime you want, upload your project in progress under the category that is appropriate for it. So if you're working on an audio story first, upload it here. If you're working on a photo story, upload it here, and so on and so forth. Once you have uploaded it this week, send me an email that says, hey, I uploaded my story so far in progress. Could you give me some feedback? And then this will be considered sort of a draft feedback. This will give me an opportunity to give you a bit of a critique as to where you are so far with the story, and that'll give you a chance to make some changes, make some adjustments before the final due date, okay? Which, of course, our very first one, you can see the due dates here. So make sure that you are working on your project and have something to upload this week. Don't be waiting until the last week to be doing this. I assume by now you're well into the project, right? You've done your research, you've started to lay things out. And you can upload whatever you want here. It doesn't have to be in its final format. If you just want to upload a Word document that shows me, the plot or your brainstorming, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that you are filling in your creative journal for the first parts of the project, your brainstorming and your research. You can show me those. Whatever you want to show me, whatever you have in progress, it's entirely up to you. I will give you feedback on all of that. Now, the microstory, of course, has to be turned in. Microstory 1 has to be turned in its final format, which would be in some desktop publishing format, Microsoft Word, Apple Pages, or Google Docs. It does not matter. Make sure you are following the writing guidelines and, of course, all the directions for the microstory. Okay, so back to Module 5. What else did we miss this week? Okay, that's kind of it in terms of what's due. Now let's take a look at this functional criticism handout, just so that you're aware of what we're doing here. So once you turn in your project, right, I am going to have turned on in Canvas the peer critique function. And what this will do is it will give you the opportunity to go in and critique the final version of your classmates' project. You'll be able to go in and assess it and give some feedback. Now, you're not just going to go in there and just write anything you want sort of willy-nilly. We do have some structure involving in this. And so it starts here with functional criticism. So I want you to read through this handout, but basically the main part about functional criticism is that it's a style of critique that is used in design, in visual design, in educational systems like we have here. And I've been using this in my classes for a bunch of years, and it's just a system that I like. It's easy for me to sort of give critique back, but you don't want to just hear from your professor. You want to hear from each other, right? You guys all have knowledge and skill and insight that is certainly worth sharing, and so we're going to share it with each other. But we have to do this a particular way, right? So first thing is, let's take a look at the three important rules of practice, right? These three characters here, right, are meant to sort of epitomize the way you don't want to be when you are critiquing somebody's work, right? So if you remember early seasons of the TV show American Idol, there were two judges on there. There were three judges, but the two we're focusing on are Paula Abdul and Simon Cowell. Now, that's sort of unimportant, but what is important is the personality type. Paula Abdul on the show was always very supportive, always had nice things to say about everybody's singing. No matter what they did, they were fabulous. They did a great job. That's good. It's nice to be supportive. You want to be supportive and helpful. But if all you're doing is saying nice things and not honestly critiquing anything, then you're not really being very helpful. You're just being positive in a way that, while it's supportive, it doesn't really help somebody improve their work. So you want to shy away from that. Then on the other end of the spectrum, on the opposite side of that coin, you have what Simon Cowell did on the show, is that he was just constantly critical all the time. And frankly, it came across as if he was more interested in just hearing his own voice than actually thinking about what he was saying to people, right? He wasn't being what we call mindful. In fact, he was more focused on what he had to say as opposed to what effect what he had to say would have on people. So you don't want to be critical for the sake of just being critical. There's no reason to just critique people and say negative things just because you sort of like to hear yourself talk or like to see yourself type something. So you also don't want to go in that direction because that's not helpful either. And of course, you can think of sort of like commentary that we see on the internet, on various social media platforms or whatnot, and these two types of personalities pop up all the time. The person who only says positive things or the person who only says negative things, and neither is particularly useful. Okay, next, you want to make sure that you're displaying a fair amount of sort of curiosity in your critiquing, meaning you should want to ask questions. You shouldn't approach this like a chore. Oh, my professor needs me to go in and critique some of my fellow students. Oh, this is boring. I don't want to do that. I don't care. I'll just write whatever. That's apathy. You don't want to do that either because, A, you have a valuable opinion. You have knowledge you can share, and it'll be helpful to your fellow classmates. And furthermore, you want to get some feedback from them in a way that shows that they're putting some actual work into it. So apathy is also not a good way to go, right? You don't want to be overly positive. You don't want to be overly negative, and you don't want to do it just because you have to do it and just feel like, whatever, I'll just do it. That doesn't work either. So you want to be curious. You want to ask questions. Okay, so now that we understand the sort of three personality types to avoid when critiquing each other, let's talk about what types of feedback we are giving. So under this section here, what is feedback? So really it can be broken down into two types of feedback, right? There's objective feedback and subjective feedback. So the objective feedback is more factual or technical. So if a particular project was supposed to be 11 by 17 inches, and if it's not 11 by 17 inches, if it's a square or it's a different shape, well then you can just easily say, this does not appear to be the size that it was supposed to be. That's objective feedback. It's not really your opinion, you're just pointing out that the directions for the assignment were not followed properly, and this is how you can correct it. So factual or technical feedback is probably the easiest to give because all you have to do is review the guidelines for the project, and you can easily see if somebody has met those criteria or not met those criteria. Now, the part that's more difficult is the subjective feedback, right? These are value judgments which discuss questions such as what is good design? What is great art? What is innovative design? These critiques revolve around opinions, but we have to be careful that opinions are backed up by thought and are backed up by education and are backed up by research, not just because you feel a certain way, right? So you can give your opinion on something. You can say, gee, I'm not sure that those colors that you used were particularly effective because I think a monochromatic palette would maybe be more indicative of the mood you were trying to capture. That's an opinion, but it's based on your knowledge of the use of color, right? Things that you've learned in class, things that you just know from doing this for a little while. Or, the fonts that you chose are really interesting, but I don't feel that they have the right personality for the type of project that you're doing here. Maybe they're too fun when your project is trying to come across as more serious. Again, that's an opinion, but it's based on knowledge that you have about the use of typography. So subjective opinions are useful, but they have to be based on some kind of knowledge that you possess, right? And remember, you're students. You don't have to know everything, but you know a lot of things. So think about what you've learned so far and then use those in your opinions. Okay, now this section here before we start the critique is really indicative of what we would do in person in class. So we can't do this so much on Canvas, but it is useful to read through it because it is sort of the same sort of process to some degree, right? Now, over here in the second column, when you're actually sitting down at Canvas and you are choosing your fellow students that you are going to give some feedback to, you want to start out with a positive, right? You want to start out with, now you don't have to do this part, you don't have to say, my name is so-and-so and this is who I'm critiquing. That's obvious when you're doing it on Canvas. But you do want to start out with number 3 here, right? You want to start out with the strengths of the piece, the positive things. I think you did these things really well. This looks really good. I think this is really effective. I am glad you did that. That's good, okay? Then you can move on to the things that maybe need some work, right? These areas of the project don't work as well as I think they could. Here's how I think they could be improved, et cetera, et cetera. And then number 5 is important because you want to ask some questions of the artist, and you want to ask questions of them because sometimes you're looking at something and you might say, gee, I have no idea why they used that particular thing in their project. You don't know how to judge it. You don't know if it's good or you don't know if it's bad. You just have questions about it. So ask the questions. You can put questions into a critique. Hey, I was wondering, why did you use that particular image? I'm curious. And then they can respond and tell you why. And that will help sort of expand your perspective on the project. Remember, critiques are not just a one-way street. They're supposed to be conversational. When we do them in class, it will definitely be conversational with the person doing the critiquing, doing some talking, and then the person who created the art doing some listening and then some answering, and then other people in the class being able to ask questions. So it's supposed to be conversational. We will try to replicate that as much as we can in Canvas with back and forth discussion, okay? So aside from saying what's good about the piece and what doesn't seem to work about the piece, also ask questions if you have them. Don't just let the questions linger and be like, oh, well, I guess I'll never know. Ask the questions, okay? Be sure to thank the person who created the artwork because it takes a lot of work and effort to create these things, and we should acknowledge that. We all know how hard we work on these things, right? And so here's some basic notes at the bottom. It does talk about asking questions, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that is the criteria by which we will be critiquing each other, whether we are in person doing it or whether we are on Canvas doing it. I, of course, will let you know how that works, but if the peer critiques are turned on in Canvas for a particular deliverable, then you have the opportunity to go in and critique 2 of your classmates. So that's the rule of thumb, is you want to go in and choose 2 of your classmates on Canvas and critique them, okay? If we do it in person, we'll just be doing 1 at a time, but on Canvas, you'll be choosing 2 of your fellow classmates. Okay, so that is about it. So get to know the functional criticism handout just so that you're aware of sort of how we're going to do this. Get a draft of your first project sent into Canvas, upload that, and of course make sure you get your microstory finished on time this week. And then that's it for week 5. Your homework, of course, is going to be to continue working on your first project based on what you were already planning to do, and of course making some adjustments based on the draft critique you get back from me whenever you get that back from me. All right, so that's it for the moment. Hope you guys are having a good day, and I will talk to you soon.